Alright, in this video I'm going to cover a type of Mandela effect that I believe belongs in a category all of its own. And this is where the Mandela effect goes far beyond, quote-unquote misremembering movie lines and name spellings, products, logos, insignias, and stuff like that. And it now goes into altering an entire historical timeline of events, which is mind-bending to wrap your head around. And there's no better example, in my opinion, than the famous Lindbergh kidnapping. Now, in the world of today, it seems like hardly anybody's heard of this case. And if they have, they're just like, oh, wasn't the kid missing or something? Well, there is a whole host of details that many people remember about this case that have now been completely altered. An entire historical timeline of events has been wiped from history, and it is mind-bending to say the least. Now, this started for me decades ago while watching The Simpsons. I saw this joke on The Simpsons, and I wondered, why is this funny? I have no frame of reference for, the punchline of this joke. I don't get it. So I had to look it up. I asked people about it, and they informed me why this joke is funny. And I went on to research this. Okay, so here we go. Here's the clip from The Simpsons.
Right, I admit it. I am the Lindbergh baby. Wah, wah, goo, goo. I missed my fly, da, da.
Are you trying to stall us? Or are you just senile?
A little from column A, a little from column B.
All right. Charles Lindbergh was a famous aviator, way back when, back in the 20s and 30s. Anyway, the famous case surrounds his 2-year-old son who was kidnapped from his crib from the second floor story of the home they lived in. And what we understood back at this time period, when I watched this video, the narrative was this child went missing. He vanished. This was an ice cold case. No suspects, no witnesses, no arrests, no body was ever recovered. So subsequently, afterwards, people would come back decades later and say, I'm the Lindbergh baby all grown up, give me my inheritance, please. So it became so frequent that it became, a joke. And so The Simpsons is kind of highlighting that with Grandpa Simpson and his, senile nature to admit to this when the cops are busting the door looking for his wife, Grandma Simpson. Anyway, so yeah, he bursts out with this joke. And the thing is, in today's world, with today's historical timeline of events, this joke makes no sense because the case was always solved. The child's remains were recovered. The kidnapper was arrested and executed. This isn't even funny. I mean, why is he just poking fun at, a case closed murder back in the day? He's not. For lack of, a better term for this, timelines have shifted. The historical timeline that he was referring to involved an ice-cold kidnapping case where no suspect was arrested, no body was recovered. And this is what I researched. I looked into this. I read all that I could find about this case. This child was never recovered. No one, not even a suspect, was named, let alone arrested or tried or executed. So, this is what was suspected to have occurred. They suspected that a kidnapper ascended a ladder into the child's nursery, kidnapped him. The child was suspected to have perhaps sustained an injury during that event. And supposedly, the would-be kidnapper just vanished. Thought, I'm not going to get a ransom out of this. I'm not even going to bother to send a note I'm gone. That's what they suspected. They suspected this was a kidnapping gone wrong, because in the timeline of events that I remember, that I researched, decades ago now, that was the case. They just based on what they saw, the disturbance at the base of the ladder looked like there was probably a fall, an injury sustained, but there was no ransom note ever received. I remember this clearly. Now, there are also details from a documentary that I saw on the History Channel, I want to say around 2008. Now, this documentary is gone, and all subsequent documentaries documenting this case, all of the details have been radically changed from what I remember. And there's no reason for this. There's no reason for me to make up this story in my head that many other people can corroborate, because many other people have the same exact memory of the timeline of events for this case. So anyway, the only thing they had, I'm going to go through the details of this documentary that I saw. The only thing that they had as evidence was this ladder. That's all they had. A broken ladder was hidden in the bushes behind the house. They suspected it was a kidnapping gone wrong because it looked like there was a kidnapping, a ransom note pinned to the window. But I remember this clearly. They thought, well, it was a windy night. They thought that it probably blew away, and they never, received the ransom. Now, there could be speculation as to whether or not, Lindbergh was actually involved. The child did have some deformities. He was a famous, supporter of eugenics, racial and genetic purity and all that. So there's speculation that, maybe him and the investigators, kept all this hush-hush. Maybe there was a ransom note. But anyway, none of those details got into this documentary that I saw. What the authorities released to the public at that time was not that this was a confirmed kidnapping. They didn't have a ransom note. That's what they told the public, the press at that time. The suspects, they zeroed in on possibly some local day laborers that were in the area that could have been suspects for a kidnapping case, or even the nanny who lived in the house, like maybe she was involved, but there was nothing conclusive, nothing enough to make any kind of arrest or confirm any suspicions. And that was it. That was ice cold for decades. And the nation was just terrified that, this could happen. Someone's child could just vanish overnight out of their nursery, out of their crib. Until I found out about the Mandela effect. Now, 3 months prior to this, a video came up on my YouTube feed. And I'm interested in things like parallel realities and quantum physics and, Schrodinger's cat, the double slit experiment, all these kind of things, quantum computing that does, point in the direction that there might be parallel realities that could explain some of these anomalies that we see in quantum mechanics. And so some of these videos show up, and I listen to what the host has to say. And this one now, after the fact of learning about the Mandela effect, just is burned into my mind, and I could not find it for the longest time. I was like, where did I see this? And it's from the host is talking about the concept of parallel realities, stating that indeed they are true, they are real. And he is saying that there are many parallel realities very similar to our own, where only one minor detail may be different. Some minor historical event may be slightly different. And to try and loosen up the audience mind about this, he runs through a list of parallel realities where certain details are slightly different, names are slightly different, historical events are slightly different. And this is before I knew anything about the Mandela effect. And, nobody was really talking much about this. I've heard about it, but it was just like, a phenomenon in South Africa. Some people thought Mandela died in prison, and turns out he didn't. Okay, that doesn't apply to me. I didn't pay much attention to this. Like, okay, it's a false memory effect for some people. Something about the Berenstain Bears I heard about. Like, okay, yeah, I never heard. Okay, so some people pronounce it Berenstain. I didn't know that the actual spelling had changed. Anyway, so this host is talking about parallel timelines. Now, I'm going to play this video and add some details about it afterwards.
Let us now show you an example of the parallel reality wheel graphic. As you can see, there are 8 different parallel reality suggestions here. Each of these, in a sense, is a real reality, and each of these is somewhat close to your own reality experience, but there are several things that are different, as you can see. In the first one, whereas in what you consider your history to be at the moment, you have a so-called memory of an individual named Albert Einstein who proposed what you call the theory of relativity. But as you can see in this graphic, in a slightly different parallel reality, an individual with a slightly different name, Albrecht Eisenstein, was the individual who proposed relativity for that particular parallel universe. As we have spoken of a little bit before, even though in your memory, your President Kennedy died in your 1963, you can see in a parallel reality that he survived 2 terms and only died in 1985. You can see that these other realities depicting slightly different histories, also just as real as your own reality.
All right, now, what I remember of this video is that he went on to another one of these proposals of a parallel reality, and he listed specifically the Lindbergh kidnapping. And I remember these words very, very clearly. He said, imagine a parallel reality very similar to your own, where your famous Lindbergh kidnapping was actually solved. The kidnapper was apprehended, the child's remains were recovered, and the case was closed. That now he doesn't say that in this video anymore. I've located this lecture, and he doesn't say it. It's gone. Why? Because the case was never unsolved. It's always been solved now. And that's when I went over a list of Mandela effects, 5 years ago, and just realized how widespread this phenomenon is. And I think something must have changed, because this was just 3 months after watching this. And he had mentioned the Lindbergh kidnapping, and this now the kidnapping's been solved. So I believe something shifted in those 3 months. And now this video no longer contains that portion where he talks about the Lindbergh kidnapping in a parallel reality always being solved, because now I'm living in it. Anyway, this is where my heart fell through the basement. My blood just goes ice cold, and I have to scrape my jaw above the floor with a putty knife, because this isn't just a name change. This is an entire historical timeline of events that has been completely altered. As I scrolled down a list of Mandela effects and saw this, some people believe that the famous Lindbergh kidnapping was never solved. No, what are you talking about? Of course, I look it up, and here it is. The baby's body was found slain in woods near home. No. And this is just jarring. This is just like getting a cinder block lobbed over your head. Now, the subsequent details of this case and how it was solved are equally as just amazing. It turns out there was a delivery truck driver who had to relieve himself driving down the road. He pulls off, and when he's there in the woods beside the road, he notices the remains of a child. That is how the baby's remains were discovered, completely by almost like a freak accident. That he just happened to stop at just the right spot to find the child's remains. Equally as baffling now is just the scope of the details now surrounding this case. There's no way I would have missed this. there was a wood expert who was brought in to investigate, and he offered his services and was tirelessly committed to helping to solve this case. Now, since that ladder was the only piece of evidence they had to go on, he was able to analyze, the grain of this wood, and locate the lumberyard where it was sold from in the Bronx. And so many of these little details about the wood were so instrumental in bringing a conviction and convincing a jury that, they had the right guy. But anyway, this was now not just a suspected ransom, kidnapping case for ransom. This is definitely confirmed. Now, the details of this case today, as it stands, is that there was always a ransom letter received. There was a payment given, $50,000 in these gold banknotes. And a couple years later, this all happened in like 1932, but a few years later, the notes were cashed in at the bank, and they were able to track down a suspect named Bruno Hauptmann. Now, when the investigators brought their search warrant and went to search his place, the wood expert told them, be sure to look out for any missing pieces of wood in the house, like floorboards particularly. And what do you know? They found missing floorboards in the attic or upper level, and they were able to trace those pieces from the ladder fit perfectly into the missing slots of the missing floorboards in the attic. And based on the grain of the wood matching perfectly with the grain of the wood that was located in the house, as well as the tooling marks from the tools he used to make the ladder, matched tools in Bruno Hauptmann's possession. So these were the primary details that were used to make this conviction, and he was then subsequently executed for the crime. None of these details existed in the previous reality that I knew. None of them. I researched this case. I watched this documentary. None of this was part of the historical timeline of events for this case. And this is so wild. And when I try and bring it up to other people, they're like, yeah, I don't really remember that. But whereas before, a lot of people had heard about this. And they were informing me about it when I saw that clip on The Simpsons. And now I ask around, and when I do get a few answers, people are like, oh, yeah, wasn't the kid never found? Oh, he was found? Oh, okay. Big deal, move on. And I'm just like, this is nuts. This is so crazy. This has radically shifted and changed among so many other Mandela effects that are equally as just hit you like a ton of bricks. I don't know how else to describe this. Earth-shattering, mind-breaking. I just don't know what else to say. And so many other people have similar memories. People like me who were familiar with the case and, researched the details. We all have pretty much the same story. Now, here's where it does get interesting. Just like other Mandela effects, where it seems like there's a few different variants, where people stick to their guns and remembering, like I mentioned before, Chick-fil-A, spelled three different ways. The Thinker statue by Rodin, and being in three different positions. People have slight varying memories about some of these details. I do come across others who remember this case saying that, oh yeah, the child was always missing, but they did catch a kidnapper, but they couldn't make a conviction because, the remains were never recovered. Or they'll say that the child's remains were recovered, but no suspect was ever arrested. So there's some slight differences, and I believe that there's just different timelines, different various timelines of events, parallel realities where, the case might have unfolded in different ways. But most people will who remember this will say that, yes, the child is an ice cold missing persons case. The child disappeared, and most people say that, yeah, no one was identified or arrested for the case. Classic missing persons case that was world famous for decades. Now, let's get into some of the residue. I showed that Simpsons clip. Well, it turns out there are so many other parody clips about people pointing to the fact that they knew this case was a missing persons case, a famous missing persons case. So, let's look at Family Guy.
You know what happened to the Lindbergh baby?
Charles, he's only 6 months old.
Honey, would you relax? God, I flew across the Atlantic by myself. I'm a national treasure, for God's sake. I think I know how to... Ah! Oh, God! Oh, God! All right. He was kidnapped. You call the police. I'll write the ransom note.
What about Amelia? She saw everything.
You leave her to me.
All right, Amelia Earhart, another famous missing persons case, tied together with this joke about another famous missing persons case being the Lindbergh baby. This joke makes no sense whatsoever, being that the child was always found, the case was always, case closed. Yeah, so there's that.
His investigation left no stone unturned. Along the way, uncovering something called the Ark of the Covenant. Someone called the Lindbergh baby. And the...
All right, so that makes no sense. Why would the Lindbergh baby be all grown up if he wasn't confirmed to be, mysteriously missing for all this time? So that joke also lands flat.
My name's Amelia Earhart. You've already met Mr. Charles Lindbergh Jr.
Whatever.
And that other fella is one Mr. Dan Cooper.
Hey, how y'all doing? Call me DB. Everybody does. Did y'all fly out here? Woohoo!
What gives? You guys have been missing for decades.
That's the funny thing about this island. It's easy to lose track of time.
You don't call, you don't write.
All right, this video game here is making fun of all these missing famous aviators. Obviously, the Lindbergh baby wasn't an aviator, but his father was a famous aviator, so that ties into that parody there. So, yeah, it makes absolutely no sense to include this child in there as being a famous missing persons in this timeline of events, yet again.
I wish I could have cracked the Lindbergh kidnapping case. I wish I could have cracked the Lindbergh kidnapping case.
I come home and I want to catch up on the news, so I'm watching, Matlock or something, and I'm unpacking. And a news bulletin comes on, and it's Linda Ellerby, noted NBC newswoman, noted ABC newswoman, and I think, oh, it's a bulletin because they've interrupted Matlock.
And there's Linda Ellerby.
There's Linda Ellerby, and I thought, maybe a break in the Lindbergh case or something. I don't know. Maybe a break in the Lindbergh case or something. I don't know.
A break in the Lindbergh case? After all these years, up to 1989? Yeah, there was a break in the Lindbergh case in 1934 when they arrested Bruno Hauptmann. So by 1934, this was an open and shut case. Mystery solved. Yet all these clips that I'm showing you, I would say constitute residual evidence that many people recall this being a famous missing persons case. And now the Mandela effect has altered that entire timeline of events so that there's no other way to explain this other than, false memory. But based on what? What are we confusing this with? I know I'm not confusing this with anything else. I only had one source of information for all of this. The research materials that I had in this documentary that I saw about the famous Lindbergh kidnapping case. There was no other narrative surrounding the details of this case. And I just don't know what else to say. Here's where I would invite any of you out there to contribute in the comments. Let me know, what do you remember, if anything, about this famous missing persons case? What do you remember about the Lindbergh kidnapping? Was it always a famous missing persons unsolved cold case? Or do you remember this timeline's version of events? it was always case closed. Never a mystery, never a missing persons case. Oh, never a mystery that was unsolved for decades, up to the present day. Yeah. Let me know what you think.